Some of the words in this video have been reworded in order to follow YouTube community rules. Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode review for Dark Side of the Ring, and in this episode it talks about the life and career of Tony Atlas. Tony is still alive, and I think a lot of you probably have seen him in the Netflix documentary of Mr. McMahon recently, where Tony said that Pat Patterson had touched Tony's pecker, which he was referring to his private part. Anyways, Tony is in the WWE Hall of Fame and was in a tag team with Rocky Johnson, the father of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. They were one of the first black tag teams to hold the tag team titles in a time where black people were not given much opportunities in the 1900s. He has also witnessed Bruiser Brody's final moments and has made some appearances for Dark Side of the Ring. I'll go over the episode first and share my thoughts at the end. Tony was born in Roanoke, Virginia on April 23rd, 1954. Happy late birthday, by the way. His mother was a devoted Christian and has been with her husband, Tony's dad, throughout his life, as she worked a lot for the household. One day, a random guy smacked Tony's mom's butt, and instead of walking away, she punched the stranger. Because of that incident, Tony's mom wanted her kids to defend themselves, as it was tough for a black person to walk outside in the old days. Tony mentioned in the episode that his mother used her hands in order to protect herself when she was young. It was there that Tony would use his fists as a way to help himself and would later pay off in his adulthood. Growing up, Tony said that if he were to lose a fight, he would come back the next day in order to get another rematch. At this point in his youth, Tony would fist fight with other people every day. He also mentioned that when he was young, he and the other kids would look up to street fighters or drug dealers. His dad used to hustle money and would bring Tony with him so that Tony could beat up the grown men, as Tony was 6 feet by the time he was 12 years old, which is the reason why Tony had to go defend for his father so he wouldn't get a beating. An example of a 12-year-old Tony taking on a grown man was when one day he took on a drunk guy who was 110 pounds. Then in another situation, Tony was walking with a girl as he liked the way her shoes looked. Somehow he got pushed to the ground and landed on his head, causing Tony to shed lots of blood. As shown in the episode, he shows us the dent scar on his head from the fall. Tony recalled his skull being split in half as his grandma was also there because she was living close by and had told Tony to pray. When he prayed, Tony remembers saying in his prayer that he wanted to be strong like Hercules and be rich. He remembered as he was being interviewed that God had given Tony everything from that prayer, even though he did end up losing a lot of money later down the line. Since the accident, Tony has never gotten his head checked or even got a diagnosis. Somehow this head injury made Tony obsessed with shoes. Tony then developed a fetish of women stepping on his face and would buy new shoes for the woman in order to fulfill his interests. Throughout his life, in order to continue his fetish, Tony would go to malls, gyms, and many other places so that his face would get stepped on. As seen in this episode, one woman can be seen stepping on Tony's face. He said that he does not suck toes of the woman that he gets stepped on and hates high heels. Tony mentions in the episode that it keeps him calm, but does not think of it as sexual. You could say that he's more into a dominatrix of some sort. Before he pursued wrestling, Tony was a bodybuilder who would train at the YMCA. Back then, the YMCA in Charlotte, North Carolina was the only place to lift weights. A wrestling promoter named David Crockett happened to be in the gym one day and found Tony, offering Tony a job with a pay of $150 per week. At 19 years old, he had 19-inch biceps and was 225 pounds. Tony wanted to wrestle at first, but had to work and train before he set foot in the ring. When Tony was 20 years old, he got his diploma as he was not able to get it on time due to him being poor. He then became a champion in weightlifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding. In his bodybuilding competitions, he once competed against Ricky Steamboat and won the title of Mr. USA. Once he finally got into the wrestling scene, Tony quickly became champion at Georgia Championship Wrestling. He fought against Tommy Rich in 1978, and the audience loved the match because during that time, it was rare to see a black wrestler and a white wrestler wrestling in a match. Unfortunately, working in wrestling was not easy, as he would get called the hard N-word backstage. Racism was still at large, as Tony said that some territories would try to keep only one black wrestler, even though he was called a racist word. Tony never told people to stop saying it, as he was making money at his wrestling job and learned to not let it get to him. With more money coming in, Tony started spending a lot of it, as he would also give it to friends and random women. Tony would also buy drinks for everyone and bought a 1976 Lincoln car, since he never had that much money as a child. People would try to be Tony's friend so that they could use him for stuff such as drinks, for example. As if that wasn't enough for Tony, he would take about 3 women in a room and they would perform orgies on him. He and the other guys, one of them being Tommy, would be known as the Bad Boys. One day, Tommy got drunk and had the wheel of the car leading up to him, Tony, and his friends into a car accident where the car had flipped 3 times. Tony recalls in the episode that he almost died from the accident. The results of the car accident led to the roof of the car getting torn off. As for Tony, he had a broken neck and was in the hospital for 3 to 4 days. Instead of letting his neck heal after getting released from the hospital, Tony immediately went back to wrestle. Afterwards, Tony went on to wrestle for the WWF. I'm not certain if it was WWF or another wrestling promotion, but when Tony wrestled Hulk Hogan at Madison Square Garden, Tony press slammed Hogan. In that match, Hulk was over 300 pounds and somehow Tony was able to lift Hulk up, like a parent lifting a baby up in the air. At WWF, Tony had become a huge star and would then work with Rocky Johnson. They ended up being a very strong tag team and were tag team champions at one point, making them the first black tag team to win the tag team titles. However, they did not get along at first and would compete with each other in order to get the top spot. Rocky was jealous of Tony as Rocky was a little older and had been working in the wrestling industry longer than Tony. Tony, on the other hand, was more skilled at a faster pace in the wrestling industry. The two of them would have fights in the locker rooms. Once the duo had won the tag team title belts, they only had it for 5 months. In the episode, Tony felt that the world back then was not ready for black champions. It was a difficult time for black wrestlers during those days, as they were looked down upon by some people. An example of it was when a wrestler named Dick Murdoch had invited Tony to a meeting. The problem with Dick inviting Tony was that Tony had dyslexia and did not read the invitation closely. Dick was in the KKK, a racist, hateful group, and Tony recalled Dick carrying his white uniform in his bag. He had given Tony a flyer and went with his friend Tommy. Once they were on the dirt road, Tommy saw the flyer and told Tony that it was a KKK meeting. As they were close to getting there, they saw a group of men with white hats and guns, but miraculously got away. Tony was taken advantage of, especially for his learning disability. Days later, Tony started to take more drugs and would get very drunk. He would begin to spiral and intimidate people in the locker rooms. As if that was not enough, Tony would also bring a gun to the locker rooms and would eventually shoot the ceiling one day. He admits in the episode that he did a lot of bad things during that time. One of those cost him a chance to be the first black WWF champion, as Tony missed one of his matches, causing the audience to be very disappointed. Instead, Tony went to Los Angeles, California, and got stomped on by a woman in order to fulfill his fetish. Like many bosses who get mad at their employees for doing bad things, Vince McMahon had Tony fired. Afterwards, Tony went to the IWC. Things did not get any easier, as Tony would then lose more wrestling jobs, leaving Tony broke and homeless and causing him to live on the streets. Tony said that he had become suicidal once he was broke. In the episode, Tony showed us the bench where he would sleep around when he was homeless back then. He recalled during those times that he would have fights, land in mud puddles while being asleep, or fall off the bench. Definitely not a good way to wake up. Somehow Tony was able to protect his trophies while he was living on the streets. Tony would also eat out of a dumpster. He remembered people knowing who he was when Tony was living in the streets, and it made him feel embarrassed. At one point, Tony got addicted to cocaine. Sometimes Tony would go to police shootings or get run over in order to take his own life. He did not care if he died during that period. Then one day, a woman came by and checked on Tony as she thought that Tony had died. The next day, she came back to check on Tony again, only for Tony to scare her away. When it was snowing one day, Tony's legs went numb and he went into a coma. Luckily for him, the woman stopped by and took him to the hospital. Her name is Monica, and she let Tony stay at her place while he was trying to get back on his own feet. He repaid the favor to Monica by paying the rent as he was able to get a bouncer job. Out of the blue, Vince McMahon had called Tony and offered to give Tony another chance. While he was trying to recall his time with Monica, Tony remembers Monica telling him that she would never see him again. However, Tony decided to propose to Monica after saving his life so that she could see him every day. As Tony came back to WWE, Vince had him change his character into a dancing character named Samba Simba, but Roddy Piper knew it was Tony as heard in an archive clip while watching this episode. Tony would wear this huge headband of feathers and carry a huge-looking shield, as seen in an archive clip. Ricky said in the episode that Vince wanted to make fun of Tony. Up until 2006, Tony finally got inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Mark Henry wanted Tony to be his manager in WWE, and he did as Tony stood by Mark's side when Mark had gone to ECW. After Tony wrestled in a tag team match with Mark, Vince had Tony fired for some reason. After WWE, Tony would do meet and greets and seemed to be very nice to his fans when he showed up to them as seen in this episode. He still makes appearances in WWE once in a while. In 2019, Monica had a stroke and is still hospitalized to this day. She can be seen in the wheelchair and Tony comes by and visits her when he can. At the end of the episode, Tony said that money made him miserable, but seems to be in a better place thanks to Monica saving his life. During this episode, Tony gives us a tour of his life as he shows us picture frames through the years. Interesting fact, he's actually a really great drawer and shows us some of his drawings. Interviewers for this episode are Tony Atlas, Mark Henry, Jerry Briscoe, Tommy Rich, Ricky Steamboat, David Crockett, and Nick Patrick, referee. As of today, Tony is still alive and will be 73 this week. He also shares a birthday with John Cena and my mom, but just different dates though. Tony's real name is Anthony White. Pretty interesting as the previous episode was about Vader and his real name was Leon White. I'm pretty sure they're not related since Tony is from Virginia and Leon was born in California. Since Tony is still alive, I will not do a whole biography of him. But if you want me to do a full biography of Tony or Mick Foley, let me know in the comments section. I give this episode an 8 out of 10 as it was very interesting and you get a better insight as to why Tony likes to get his face stepped on. They did not mention how Tony was the one who held Bruiser Brody during his last moments after getting stabbed. If you want to know more about that, you can watch the Bruiser Brody Dark Side of the Ring episode on Tubi or Hulu if you have a subscription with Hulu. Or you can watch my episode review if you would like to watch it. That gimmick he had of Samba Simba seemed to be racist, if I'm going to be honest, but it's typical Vince behavior as he sometimes likes to embarrass his wrestlers that he's not very fond of. It was not a really good idea. I thought that Tony's story of how he met Monica was very romantic. Maybe they should make a Tony Atlas movie of his life, as he had gone through a lot, but was able to rise above it in the end. Very sweet of him for being there for Monica, even though she can't walk anymore after that seizure that she had. Was hoping that Dark Side of the Ring would go into detail on what Tony had said in the Mr. McMahon documentary, such as Pat touching Tony's pecker, or private part, and what he saw Pat doing backstage, and the part where he mentioned that he and the other wrestlers had abused women. Dark Side of the Ring probably has to follow a time limit, which is why there's so much information left out, because talking about someone's life takes a lot of time, especially getting different people's point of view. It was still an interesting episode to hear about Tony's side of his story, and crazy that he has survived after going through what he had gone through. I feel like he does not get enough recognition for it though. Anyways, that's pretty much all I have for this episode review. But if you would like to comment, like, or subscribe, and take care of your mental health and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. Bye guys.